Hi, everyone. We're here this afternoon with Dr. Dan Kramer from Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, and also with a joint appointment at James Madison College. And Dan and I have worked together since 2006, largely on a project based in Nicaragua, and traveled to Nicaragua a lot of times over the years. And Dan has some other interesting projects that he'll talk a little bit about today. But I'll let Dan introduce himself a little bit, and then we'll get into some more questions.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, I'm Dan Kramer. So I'm a professor in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. I have a joint appointment, as Jerry said, in James Madison College. So I'm a conservation biologist by training. I've been at MSU for 15 years. So I teach conservation biology, a class in conservation biology. I teach a statistics course in James Madison, and other courses related to environmental policy, sustainable development, and globalization.
Great. So tell us a little bit about some of your current research projects.
Sure. You mentioned the Nicaragua project. So a lot of the things that I'm currently doing are sort of thematically related to that project. So my research looks at infrastructure development. So infrastructure development that particularly affects remote places. So places where there may be people, but they're hard to access. And so I'm trying to understand how infrastructure like new roads or dams or energy infrastructure affects how people and the environment interact. And so after you and I completed the Nicaragua project, I got some funding from NASA to do some work in the Mekong region. So Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam. And so there we're looking at the effects of dams built on the Mekong River and its tributaries, and looking at how those effects affect downstream communities and how it changes how people interact with their environment. And particularly, I'm interested in how it affects their livelihoods and how changes in those livelihoods affect particularly wildlife resources and other environmental resources.
Well, great. You know, you've got this wide variety of research you do. How did you initially get interested in fisheries and wildlife?
So I grew up in northern Minnesota in a small town, town of about 7,000 people. And so that kind of small town, we were surrounded by lakes. I grew up in a town called Detroit Lakes. Within 10 miles of Detroit Lakes, there were 400 lakes. And so everywhere. And so we lived on a lake. My friends lived on lakes. And so I grew up hunting and fishing, and my family liked to recreate outdoors. And so we did a lot of hiking, a lot of camping. And so I just kind of grew up in a small town with, that was the thing to do. With your family and with your friends, you spent a lot of time outside.
Great. So tell us a little bit about the background behind you, why you chose that background.
Yeah, so this background is from Homer, Alaska. And so I have a course. It's a national parks study away course. And so far we've only gone 2 places, but we've gone there repeatedly. So we've gone to Yellowstone National Park a few times, myself and the former dean of James Madison College, Sherm Garnett. And we've gone to Alaska. So this is the picture from Alaska. We've gone there twice. And so this picture particularly is a picture that I took from a yurt that was where we stayed in Homer. And so all the students shared yurts in this kind of camp area in Homer, which overlooked the bay in the Kenai Peninsula.
Right. That's cool. I've been kind of envious of those. I do all my tropical trips, but I'd really like to take students into temperate regions and, you know, in this case, bordering on the Arctic.
Yeah, and as I complain to you sometimes when we were in Nicaragua, the heat is not sort of my natural element. And so
yes,
doing more things in temperate regions was a good thing for me.
Yeah. So for students to think about, I'm asking all the people I interview what they think is the most important issue today in terms of fisheries and wildlife, conservation, conservation biology, all of that. And so what do you think is the most important or multiple most important issues today?
Yeah, also it's difficult, I guess, to be specific, but quite generally, my focus, for my own expertise and the courses that I teach and my research is really about the conservation of biodiversity, in particular rare and threatened species, which there's a growing list of rare and threatened species, of course, because of all the multiple threats that they face. So if I had to sort of name one critical issue, it would be, trying to figure out a way that humans can lighten their impact on wildlife and learning to live with wildlife in more harmonious ways. And so, there's lots of different classes in fisheries and wildlife on, say, human wildlife conflict, on reducing sort of your ecological footprint. Those sorts of things we need to learn to do much, much better if we're going to leave the natural world, a better place, and it's certainly as good as we found it for our own children and our grandchildren.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then finally, just do you have any advice, insights, anything you'd like to share with the FW 101 students as they start their journey toward becoming fisheries and wildlife majors?
Yeah, I guess a bit of advice. So when I started as an undergraduate, I was a biology major. I thought I was going to be pre-med, but I slowly kind of drifted away from that. Eventually, not until I was in a master's program did I start really kind of getting into fisheries and wildlife as a formal area of study. And so all of you are sort of ahead of me in some regards, and that you've decided that this is where you want to be. And I guess my bit of advice would be to try to minimize self-doubt or the hand-wringing that some of you may have in terms of whether this is the right field. It has to be the right field, you have to decide that, but thinking about jobs and some of the more practical things that ultimately you will concern yourself with, maybe is not the time. If you're passionate about something, and presumably fisheries and wildlife is something that most of you are passionate about, I think things will work out for you. And certainly they worked out for me. And I just sort of followed my passions and didn't worry too much about the advice other people gave me about whether it's a viable thing to study, whether I would find a good job, that sort of thing. If you're passionate about the subject, I think things will work out.
Great. Yeah, I agree 100% on that. That's where things have to start with you having this enthusiasm, excitement, all of that for what you're doing, and the willingness then to work hard comes out of that, and good results come out of that. So, well, thank you, Dan. Hopefully students will run across you in some of their upper level classes in coming years. And I'll end the recording now.